In a kingdom where the highest honor is bestowed upon those who craft with their hands, there lived a carpenter whose skill was unmatched. His chisels and hammers could turn rough timber into the most intricate works of art, and yet he lived in humble quarters, far from the comforts of royalty. One fateful day, the king sent for him with a task that would change the course of his life forever. Little did the carpenter know that he was about to enter a contest that would test not just his craftsmanship, but his very soul. It was a quiet morning in the village when the royal messenger arrived at the carpenter's humble workshop. The carpenter, named Kofi, had just finished shaping a piece of wood into a delicate chair when the messenger burst in, breathless. "Kofi, the king commands your presence," the messenger said, handing him a royal scroll sealed with wax. Kofi's heart skipped a beat. He had never been summoned by the king before. He opened the scroll with trembling hands. "To the greatest craftsman of the land, I, King Kwame Sex, have a task that requires the finest hands in the kingdom. You are hereby commanded to come to the royal palace and build a throne fit for a king. The throne must be unlike any other, both in its beauty and its strength. Should you succeed, a great reward shall be yours. Your skills are legendary, and I trust you will not fail." King Kwame Kofi was stunned. He had heard of the king's demand for the finest craftsmen to create a throne, but he never imagined he would be called. Still, his heart swelled with pride. He had worked with wood for years, honing his craft, and now this was his chance to prove himself to the king. But there was one problem. The task seemed nearly impossible. The king wanted a throne that was perfect, beautiful enough to inspire awe, strong enough to last for generations. Kofi had never built something as grand as a throne before. Would he succeed, or would he disappoint the king? Kofi packed his tools, a set of chisels, hammers, and carving knives, and set off for the palace. The journey was long and treacherous, but his mind raced with ideas. What could he create that would impress the king? He thought of intricate carvings, delicate designs, and sturdy structures, but nothing felt grand enough for a throne. When Kofi finally arrived at the palace gates, he was met by the king's guards, who led him to the royal chamber. The king, seated upon his grand throne, greeted him with a nod. "Kofi, I've heard much about your skill," the king said. "Now, I will test you. You must create a throne that will represent the might and majesty of this kingdom. If you succeed, your name will be etched in history." Kofi bowed deeply, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been in such an imposing room. The walls were decorated with gold, and the air smelled of incense and wealth. The king's throne, a magnificent seat of gold and jewels, stood tall at the far end of the room. "I will give you 2 weeks to complete this task," the king continued. "Should the throne not meet my expectations, I will find another who can do the work." With that, the king left, and Kofi was left standing in the grand chamber, staring at the empty space where his throne would soon stand. His mind whirred with ideas, but doubt crept in. Could he really do it? Kofi spent the first few days gathering the finest materials: oak, wood from the ancient forest, strong leather for the seat, and gold leaf for decoration. He worked tirelessly, but every time he stepped back to admire his progress, something felt off. The throne was sturdy, yes, but it lacked the elegance and beauty that the king demanded. The carvings were intricate, but they felt too simple for such an important task. As the days passed, Kofi grew more frustrated. He spent sleepless nights in the palace workshop, carving and reshaping, but nothing seemed to be right. The throne felt too heavy, too imposing, like a piece of furniture meant for battle, not for royalty. Kofi feared that the king would see his failure and send him away in disgrace. On the seventh day, King Kwame Desu visited Kofi's workshop. The carpenter was nervously polishing the wood, trying to make it shine. When the king stepped into the room, Kofi bowed low. The king examined the throne with sharp eyes. He ran his fingers along the carvings and tested the sturdiness of the seat. Kofi stood silently, his heart in his throat. "This throne is indeed well made," the king said slowly, "but it lacks something." Kofi's heart sank. "What does it lack, Your Majesty?" he asked. The king smiled softly. "It lacks soul. A throne is not just wood and gold. It is a symbol of power, of wisdom, of the very heart of the kingdom. Can you give this throne that essence?" Kofi felt a pang of doubt. How could he infuse such a piece with the soul of the kingdom? But then an idea struck him, a memory of the village elders telling him stories of the past, of kings and rulers who earned their thrones through wisdom, kindness, and bravery. The throne could not just be a physical object, it had to embody the spirit of leadership. "I understand, Your Majesty," Kofi said, bowing deeply. Kofi spent the next few days in deep thought. He began to think less about the materials and more about the meaning behind the throne. He decided that the throne should not just be a seat of power, but a seat of wisdom and compassion. He carved symbols of unity, justice, and strength into the wood, each design representing the values that the king upheld. He used the gold leaf not just for decoration, but to highlight these values, as if the throne itself would glow with the light of the kingdom's ideals. When Kofi finally completed the throne, it was unlike any other. The wood shimmered with warmth, and the carvings seemed to tell a story, not just of power, but of the kingdom's history. It was sturdy, but also graceful, fit for a king who ruled with wisdom and strength. On the last day of the 2-week deadline, Kofi stood before the throne, nervous but proud. The king arrived, flanked by his advisors, and Kofi led him to the throne. King Kwame II inspected the throne carefully, running his hands over the carvings and sitting upon it. For a moment, he said nothing. The room was silent, the only sound the faint rustling of the king's robe. Finally, the king stood and turned to Kofi. This throne, he said softly, is perfect. It is not just a seat, it is a symbol of all that we stand for. You have truly captured the soul of this kingdom. Kofi's heart soared. I am honored, Your Majesty. The king smiled and beckoned Kofi to stand by his side. You have not only proven your skill, but your understanding of what it means to lead. For this, you shall be richly rewarded. Kofi bowed, his hands trembling with gratitude. King Kwame II rewarded Kofi with gold, land, and a place at his court. But the greatest reward was the king's trust and admiration. From that day forward, Kofi became the royal carpenter, responsible for creating works that would last through the ages. His throne, a symbol of wisdom and leadership, was displayed in the heart of the palace. But Kofi never forgot the lesson the king had taught him, that true craftsmanship goes beyond skill. It is about infusing meaning and purpose into one's work. And so, the humble carpenter, once unknown to the king, became a legend in his own right, a man who carved not just wood, but the very future of the kingdom. The story of Kofi the carpenter teaches us that true greatness comes not from skill alone, but from understanding the deeper meaning behind our work. Whether in carpentry, leadership, or any craft, it is the heart and soul that we put into our work that makes it truly exceptional.